All's Well That Ends Well is a fairy tale. There's a young orphan, a prince she's in love with, and both of them are both more and less than charming. It's a story about action and adventure, about secrets and desire, and the production that my colleague Lyndon Keck and I worked on was also about stories, and books, and paper, and their place in our changing world. Books matter with fairy tales. It's not just the stories, but the book, the object, the body of those stories that holds meaning. Fairy tale books are beautiful and seem timeless, magical, so that even if Paul O. Zerlinski's Rapunzel was published in 2002, the design of that book tells us that it comes from a time beyond regular dates, long ago and far away. These books give off a familiarity. They evoke a nostalgia for childhood and for the past. However, sometimes that nostalgia can be misplaced. In many fairy tales, the characters fall into rigid gender stereotypes where the story is not driven by what the main heroine wants or does, but what the other characters want from her or do to her. It's easy to look at these main characters as passive and not active. In All's Well That Ends Well, Helena, who in many other ways fits fairy tale norms, is anything but passive. Her actions and desires drive the plot of the play, but it's complicated because she makes it clear from her language that she's not comfortable with this role. She wants to be pursued, not be the pursuer. So instead of saying, I love Bertram, she'll say things like, he is loved of me, or even an extreme example where she doesn't want to say, I take you, and while she can't avoid referring to herself as the subject, she also makes herself the object. I give me and my service, ever whilst I live, into your guiding power. This is something that I love about Shakespeare. In some of his earlier plays, the language is a lot easier and simpler to read, but in the later plays, it gets all tangled. Not because Shakespeare forgot how to write, but because he was using the very structure of sentences to depict the tensions of his characters. The closer you look at these plays, the more you will see. So we talked a little bit about how characters in fairy tales are sometimes passive, and how All's Well both evokes and subverts that tradition. But I wanted to connect this back to books. When writing about paper in this period, Shakespeare and other playwrights often gender paper as female. The paper is fair and vulnerable to ruin and not fulfilling its purpose without the action of the male pen, which the paper passively receives as text, and then together pen and paper bring forth meaning. So there's all kinds of problems with these analogies. This sort of metaphor assumes that both paper and women are passive, which is insulting and clearly not the case for the whole female gender, but I would argue that books and the paper they're made of are also active in the process of reading. This is especially the case with pop-up books. There's a lot less popular debate around the merits of ebooks and e-readers today than there was 5 years ago when I was writing and researching this thesis. But at the time, there was a button on Amazon where you could say, tell the publisher, I want this book available on Kindle, and that button was there for every book that wasn't already on Kindle. They fixed it, maybe because people like me took far too much pleasure in clicking it for pop-up books. There are books where you can take away the paper and still have the essence of the book. But if it's a pop-up book, that's simply not possible. The paper is what's active. The paper is what speaks. So in my master's program, we wanted to put all these ideas into a production. The fairy tales and the importance of books and the metaphor of passive blank paper folded in on itself. So in our production, I made a giant 5-foot pop-up book that was the set for the production. It was fairy tale themed, but entirely blank paper. And the costumes for all the actors were also white. Many of them had paper details, paper snowflakes, hats, jewelry, all the props I made, a paper pocket watch, and all sorts of things. All the costumes and props were white, except for the symbols of power, which were set off in a startling red. We were also very interested in gender as something to perform, and so we had a man playing one of the major female characters, and many women playing men. I've never been more proud of a production. And the best part of all this exploration into design and textiles and folktales is that we got to do it with Shakespeare, whose stories are so wonderfully and beautifully told, they've been canonized as some of the greatest in the world. But the meaning of these stories changes over time because culture changes, technology changes, humanity changes, changing, we hope, for the better. So that even as we all use and enjoy and take advantage of the opportunities provided by the technologies of a changing world, we can look backwards as well as forwards and think clearly about what we want to keep and what we don't. We can enjoy reading each other's blogs on our phones and still revel in the tactile pleasures of paper. Stories, like the heroines in fairy tales, do not need to merely react to the world around them. In one massive grammatical feat, they can flip out of the role of object and into the role of subject, not passive, but active. Not culture changes stories, but stories can change culture.